Thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you, Chairman Powell, for being with us today. And thank you for your extraordinary efforts and the efforts of the Federal Reserve to contribute to the emergency rescue that we've all witnessed. I've got at least two concerns, though, that I want to explore with you. And the first pertains to who was the beneficiary of the billions of dollars, trillions of dollars that have been mobilized in the rescue. Chairman, as you know, a company can do three things with its money, right? It can buy stuff, cost of goods sold, rent, insurance, space, raw materials. It can pay wages, keep people employed. And third, it can service its capital structure. It can pay interest on bonds or to banks. It can issue dividends. Chairman Powell, as you know, in the Paycheck Protection Program, we set up an explicit incentive that money be used for wages. My first question, Chairman Powell, is let's start with the primary market corporate credit facility, where you're actually lending directly through the issuance of securities to corporations. Is there any incentive or requirement that recipients of that aid preference the payment of wages over the service of the payment of interest or the purchase of stuff?
I'll put it this way, there's nothing in the CARES Act. The CARES Act specifically exempts the transactions that take place in the primary market corporate credit facility from those requirements. They do apply to direct loans. Actually, no, different requirements apply to direct loans. You're really talking about the requirements of the Paycheck Protection Act.
Yeah, no, I mentioned the Paycheck Protection Program obviously explicitly created an incentive for the use of that money to pay wages and therefore keep up employment. It doesn't sound like the Fed lending, the primary market corporate credit facility, has those protections. Let me ask you to reflect, and I can't run through all 11 programs, but the commercial paper funding facility, the primary dealer credit facility, the money market mutual fund credit facility, all of these credit facilities, are there any terms in the availability of that liquidity that preferences the payment of wages over the servicing of debt by corporations?
No, there aren't. And, you know, we're implementing the law that you passed. The CARES Act specifically does not apply those things. And we don't think it's up to us to kind of rewrite the law to achieve goals we might have. I
do understand that. I mean, having lived through the political fallout of the TARP program, when America saw the banks and the auto companies bailed out and the preservation of an awful lot of the shareholders and the bondholders associated, I'm very sensitive to programs that ultimately use public money to allow corporations to avoid bankruptcy and service their debt and ultimately pay dividends. So I just commend that to my colleagues as something of real concern, because when the story is told here, I think a lot of private, and I'm not just talking about corporations, I'm talking about the car wash guy down the street who got who qualified for a loan. A lot of that money will have been used to keep banks solvent, to preserve loans, and to service bonds. Chair Powell, I want to explore another deep concern I have about these. As much as I support your efforts and the Federal Reserve's efforts to bail us out here, in my 1 decade plus or minus doing this, this is now the second time in which it has been necessary for the government, the Federal Reserve, and fiscal policy to step in a truly massive way to bail out the economy. 10 years ago, it was the banks, it was the auto industry. Now we're seeing the airlines, and the list goes on and on and on. And the worry I have, which relates to my first worry, is that actors in the private market, and I was once in the private sector, are going to decide that they can take on a lot more risk, repurchase shares, dividend capital, because when the going gets tough and catastrophe hits, we'll be there to bail them out. So I want to use my last, 40 seconds or so to ask you to reflect on whether you think that the activities of the last 6 months and of the last 10 years have created significant moral hazard in our market system.
So let me first say that, of course, the intended beneficiaries of all of our programs are workers, and we're able to keep their jobs because companies can finance themselves. So that's really the point of it. No, you raise a good question, and I would just, certainly it's a concern, and that's why, generally we don't look for ways to insert ourselves into markets when they're functioning. this is a world historical event unlike any other. The situation that happened is one where we really felt like we had to come in with all of our tools as aggressively as possible. And I don't regret those decisions. I do realize that's why I always say that we'll put the tools away. And I take it very seriously. You know, ultimately, in a free market, in an economy like ours, you should get the benefits of your success and the cost of your failures too. And that's the way it should work. So